Hello, and War here, and welcome to sort of a build guide and sort of not a build guide. Yesterday I talked about I want to update my old build guides, and today I sat down and started to look at my old builds and see what I could improve on them. But it's just ending up almost being the same again. Even though I think about that for hours and sat down in hours and think about how should I change this build to be more in line with the modern game, and I couldn't figure out a way. The original build still works, but they are not as powerful as was back in the day when I originally made those builds. For example, the build I'm playing right now, which is my Incinerated Witch, which you probably can see. It used to actually use dual wielding. I used to dual wield two once on this build, but when I was putting together the build again and tried it out, the damage was quite fine, but the survivability was just way too low. It was so hard to play it and not die. So I figured out this isn't working. The build have too little survivability. So I changed it to use a shield, which did a lot of good for the build survivability. But I lost a lot of damage when not dual wielding. So yeah. So I lost a lot of damage, and I just figured I trying to update my old builds, but the idea behind the builds are very outdated, and they will probably not be able to do the highest level of content anymore. They used to do it back in the day, but I don't really know if they can do it anymore, and I don't have any high level maps because I'm playing way too little still. And I don't have high level maps in standard, which all of my old builds I'm updating are. And well, how do I say this? I already redid this video like 6 times now because I'm never getting satisfying with it when I'm recording. But the builds they're not as powerful as they were back in the day. They still work fine, but I don't know if they will struggle at the highest level, like tier 16, tier 15 maps and all that. They can probably do it, but damage isn't that high as they were back in the day, and yeah. So it has been very hard to actually make an updated version of my old builds, and I don't really know how to do it anymore, because I haven't when the game has changed, I haven't changed with it when it comes to my old idea of building builds, and I always go for builds that I find fun to play, which I still think these builds are, and also quite beginner friendly and cheap to make. But it can probably struggle at the highest level of gameplay. But I'm still going to talk about this build. I'm just going to beat the double boss here. This is a tier 12 map. You can see the effects on the map right there. And the survivability is a lot better than it was before on this build, but you can see the damage on it. It killing them, but I'm taking a lot of damage, and if I was using my original idea, then I probably would have been dead there. By the way, it was hard hitting enemies, but well, still. But anyway, let's take a look at this build. And I'm not going to talk too much crap about my builds. Let's take a look at the skill tree first, and let's take a look at the ascendancy first. My ascendancy are, as they usually are on this build. I went for Program of Calamity, Pendulum of Destruction, Mastermind of Discord, and Line of the Primordial. I absolutely love Mastermind of Discord, and I have it on a lot of builds which are elementalists. And that's because when I'm using a Herald, the damage type of that Herald, like for example using Herald of Ash in this build, it penetrates 25% of enemies' fire resistance when they are affected by a Herald of Ash, which is a lot of fire penetration. I also love pen mode extraction because first for 5 seconds you have a gigantic amount of AoE, 25% increased AoE, and for other 5 seconds after that you have a gigantic amount of extra elemental damage added to you, which is also very nice. Also love Program of Calamity because it makes you completely immune to everything reflect. So you can play whatever reflect maps you want when you have this one, and you take absolutely no reflect damage from anything involving elements. I also have Line of Primordial. It allows me to have an extra golem, it gives me some extra damage when using golems, so it's a nice damage boost. And your golems annoying your enemies, which is quite awesome as well. Also makes them too immune to elemental damage. In the actual skill tree, I went for spell damage here in the beginning, and Arcanist Dominion, Firewalker, Heart and Soul, Deep Wisdom, Arcane Will, Blast Radius. I went for Cruel Perception, Heart of Flame for some nice damage boost, and fire damage and penetrating fire resistance. Also a very small amount of energy shield leech, but it's something. I have a bit of energy shield. I have 600 energy shield, so it is not going to waste. And I have Breath of Flame. And here is one of the newer ones I'm using this build because I'm using shield. I'm using Arcane Guardian. Give me some damage, increases my energy shield giving for my shield, which is quite fun. Also increases my spell damage if I blocked recently. And also give me some spell damage when holding a shield, and give me some good chance to block spells with shields. I'm using Mental Rapidity to get some nice boost to my cast speed. And I'm using Elemental Overload. And Elemental Overload I used to proc it using my trusty Fireball. So when I use it, I just firing a bunch of fireballs and get the proc. It procs quite easily as well when I'm using Fireball. Using Explosive Impact in this whole nice will here. Really nice note. Increased AoE is always good. I have Purity of Flesh, Serenity, so I can use my auras and mana reserves much more easier. And have some mana over. I'm using Faith and Steel for some protection. I'm using Divine Judgment for a good increase to my elemental damage. I have Yule Socket here. This Yule Socket here, there is nothing special with this Yule, just give me some life and cast speed. But if you can afford it, try to get one which has some fire damage or spell damage as well. I have Devotion, Holy Dominion, Light of Divinity, Amplify to get some increased AoE. I have Retribution, Discipline Training. I took Precision because I wanted some Dexterity, but it also gave me some nice amount of cast speed as well. All of these notes here. I don't care about the accuracy, but I do care about the cast speed. And this one gives both cast speed and some Dexterity, which I needed. I almost forgot, I also have taken Serenity for some nice chance to block both spell damage and attack damage, and a good chunk of elemental resistance as well, which makes it a little bit easier on the gear. And I took one of the new notes, which is Glancing Blow. It doubles my chance to block both spell damage and attack damage, but I take 50% of damage I blocked from hit still. But that is a 50% damage reduction from everything I block, which is I'm totally fine with, so I really like this note. I also take Combat Stamina for some armor, life and life regeneration. I have another Yule Socket here, and this one is more in line with what I talked about before. It have a lot of cast speed and some life. The only thing this one are missing, or if it had some spell damage or fire damage on it as well. Oops. And finally I have the big life pool here. And that's pretty much my shield version of this build. If you want to go for the dual wield version, I'm going to have another link in the description where you can find the dual wield version, which isn't as tanky as this one, but it still works. So let's take a look at my gear. The gear is pretty much the same as my old gear, which means for my weapon, which is this, in this case, are a wand. You want added fire damage to spells, increased cast speed, increased either spell damage or increased fire damage or elemental damage. This one have an old mod, which is 0.2% of my fire damage is Lich's life. I don't know if you can still get that mod outside the standard league, because I don't think you can craft that mod anymore. But I could be wrong in that regard. And for my shield, just try to get a shield which has spell damage and life. That's the most important thing. And some block chance if you can. I like this shield because it gives me some amount of armor. But if I really want some more hit points, I could just go with a shield which have a lot more energy shield instead. And that would be a lot more, even more tankier. But I went for this shield here. And I'm quite happy with it. But there are a lot better shields you can get. For my helmet, just defensive helmet with as high amount as armor as you can get. Try to get the resistance you might need and some life. For my armor, nothing special, life and resistance, and this one even have some mana. For my rings, life, resistance, and if you can afford it, either cast speed or damage, like increased fire damage, increased spell damage, or increased elemental damage, or a combination of that. Also, try to get I forget what I was gonna say right there. But this ring is again nothing special and could be a lot better because I don't have any damage on it. On my other ring, same thing here, life resistance, and if you can, some damage on it as well. For my amulet, this one have cast speed and some amount of spell damage. It could be more powerful, but yeah, again, if you can afford it, try to get some more damage on your amulet as well. But then again, life and maybe the resistance you need. For my gloves, life and resistance you need. And some good armor is welcome as well. For my belt, just life, as much life as you can afford on a belt. And the resistance you might need. For boots, life, maybe resistance if you need again. And the highest amount of movement speed as you can get. For my flask, just using this remove freezing flask, which is quite handy. Here is one of the two uniques I'm using in this build, which is Ramus Concoction, not a must-have, but the extra chance to block is certainly welcome. I'm using a Basalt Flask for some more protection, using a Seer's Promise for some nice damage boost, and I have a Movement Flask with increased movement speed drawing flask effect, which makes me run quite fast. So let's take a look at my skill games now. For my Incinerate setup, using Incinerate, Link to Combustion, Link to Control Destruction for a good amount of spell damage, Immolate, because my skill have almost 100% chance to ignite enemies, which means that they take a good amount of extra added fire damage against burning enemies, which is a lot of damage. I'm using Infused Channeling, because there are no reason not to use Infused Channeling when you're using a channeling skill. It gives me a lot of damage and some protection. It also gives me some protection as well. And I'm using Fire Penetration, which is may or may not be a must-have for this build, but I like to just ignore enemies' resistance almost. And that's my setup for my Incinerate. I'm using a movement skill, which is a Lightning Warp, the old classic setup with Lightning Warp, and I actually really like how the skill looks like. I'm not going to talk too much about that and waste your time. But I'm using Lightning Warp together with faster casting and less duration. So this is my main way of teleporting around and avoiding enemies, which I certainly like. You can probably use Frost Blink as well in this build. For my, I have a Orb of Storm setup, and Orb of Storms are linked to increased critical strike, flammability. When I think about it, I don't really know why I have flammability here, but I have for some reason. I think I just put it there and forgot it. But just ignore I have flammability there. It's probably an old setup. But I'm using Orb of Storms together with Cast 1 Damage Taking, a level 1. And increase critical strike, and I'm quite liking that setup. For my auras, using Clarity, Anger, and Herald of Ash. For my golems, I'm using Fire Golem, and a lightning golem, which I forgot to summon, if I'm gonna be honest. And I can use 2 golems at the same time. Because, wait, before I talk about that, my fire golem and lightning golem are both supported by minion speed and minion life to make them as tanky as possible, because I'm not using them for them to do damage. I'm using them for them to give me damage. And the reason I can use 2 of them, because many people have asked how can I use 2 golems. Well, it is because I have this note here. Lightning Primordial allows me to use 1 extra number of golem. And if you really want to use 3 golems, there is an easy way. If you don't want to have any items, you can just take Golem Commander. If you want some even more golems, you can take Golem Commander, which is quite nice if you want to. And that's pretty much it. I also have my fireball set up. I almost forgot to mention that, which is a wall fireball, so I can use this to just clear a lot of enemies, and actually doing quite good of damage. And it's supported by elemental profilation, so when I'm killing an enemy and they are burning, for example, they will just burn every enemy around them as well. Also nice AoE damage as well. Using combustion and increased critical strike to increase the chance of me getting a crit with it. And that's pretty much my passive skill tree, my gems and my items. This is not how I usually do my build guides, but this is a little bit different. So I hope you guys liked this video, and I hope it didn't get too long for you. And tell me in the comment what you think about one of my old builds and remaking it in this a little bit newer, more tankier, but less damage light. But anyway, I thank you for watching, and I hope you liked my video.